Hello folks, there are a bunch of updates from the patch 12.10 PTR to go through, including some very nice updates for housing fans, a bigger than usual item level bump for Season 2, and some attempts by Blizzard to address player feedback about the design of the new open world event, Fangs of Ul'atek. Let's dive in. Now, when the patch was announced, one very early point of feedback was how the new zone was kinda made to sound like a retread of the patch 12.05 Void Assaults, a piece of content that in my view has failed to land at all well with the majority of the player base, with rolling events which if you do enough would trigger a boss to spawn. Certainly sounds familiar for sure. Perhaps learning from the issues with that event and patch 11.15's Void Assaults, the WoW devs arranged a Play with the Blues event on the PTR to try to concentrate players in larger than usual numbers to test the open world event on the PTR. This did result in some feedback that highlighted a lack of clarity for the new objectives, a lack of variety in the tasks, and due to flying not being available in the vaults, something I will come back to in a minute, overly long travel times for the time that you end up spending on each event. In response, Blizzard have announced a fresh Play with the Blues event, which has taken place by the time this video goes live, but which promised a series of updates focusing on quality of life. This includes a brand new breadcrumb quest, a flight network, earlier access to stealth and movement buffs, and a new tool to show where players are congregating. Now, these are improvements for sure. The new underground area does have a tech tree which allows us to earn power-ups and new abilities to make life in the area better over time. And as any rogue knows, stealth makes a huge difference when navigating underground areas, and movement speed always takes the sting out of being grounded or being unable to mount. That said, there was unfortunately still no mention of any improvements to the depth and variety of the available activities. One of the things that made patch 10.15's Time Rifts the success it was the sheer quantity and variety of different activities. And since then, the developers have, in my view, consistently failed to match that depth, with many of the subsequent events in the War Within and Midnight feeling somewhat lacking on that front. The end result is activities which for me often lack long-term replayability. Obviously, there is still time on the PTR to change that. Now, the news that this new area will be a no-fly area has perhaps predictably caused a lot of concern in the community, especially as Val and Naigtal were also no-fly zones. And let's be honest, those zones don't really seem to have been very popular at all. Now, it is worth saying that Val and Naigtal's lukewarm at best reception isn't solely due to them being no-fly zones, but in my opinion, much more due to the new heroic modes affixes feeling far more punishing than they are challenging, and in all seriousness, being locked into combat with damage sponges with little or no interesting mechanics does get pretty boring very quickly. And while the zone's world quests and activities did introduce some brand new quest mechanics which were very cool, the overall pool of those quests is far too shallow and repetitive, especially given the way that the quests rotate every 20 minutes. And that meant that for me, those zones very quickly lost their appeal. But at the same time, while Val's zone design is totally unsuited for flying, Naigtal's is actually bigger than even the Siren Isle, in my view could have supported flying just fine, and being able to get about quickly is something that does make a massive difference to how new zones feel. Now, one very important thing that I do think is worth calling out is that the new zone Isle of Fangs does support flying in the above ground area. The flying restrictions, if you could call them that, only apply to the new underground area Fangs of Ul'atek, which is very large and substantial, big enough that unusually for an underground area, ground mounts are going to be allowed. But that size also does mean that flying would be perfectly feasible, and in my view, probably even desirable. And it is clear that Blizzard are hoping that we will spend a lot of time in that zone with the new event. Overall, I personally have my doubts, at least in the event's recent showings. But like Val and Naigtal, that will be a lot more to do with the design of the event itself than the lack of flying. But at the same time, with higher than usual player numbers on the PTR thanks to these events, there is at least a little bit more feedback than is the norm for testing open world events, and that is for sure creating an opportunity for Blizzard to iterate some more before it goes live. And that iteration is definitely needed, as there is no doubt in my mind that if the event does not excite players over the long term, then that lack of flying will come to the fore and will end up making matters worse. Mobility in video games is critically important to how good they feel. And whether the devs like it or not, flying has been core to WoW's mobility for almost 20 years, and every attempt by the devs to remove it or limit it has invariably ended in tears. Whereas in contrast, attempts to improve it, such as the introduction of dragon riding, or indeed that undermine racing car, has been major successes. So I do think that by limiting flying, the developers are playing with fire here, especially as they promised no meaningful restrictions to flying just a couple of months ago. Customers really don't like feeling that they're being misled, and Blizzard did squander a lot of player trust back in the BFA and Shadowlands, player trust that they are still in the process of recovering, and it would be a massive shame if they derail that process now with an ill-judged attempt to reduce the use of flying in the game. But on a less controversial note, housing fans have quite a lot to look forwards to, including the ability to place pets in your home. But more important than that, we're getting 3 new housing levels, with some major increases to our interior decoration and room budgets. So if you're someone who likes to tinker, you will be able to add some more rooms to build out really soon. Along with that, we are getting some decent updates to the exteriors, with the addition of large-sized houses. And while we're not getting any major new additional customization elements to add to those new larger-sized buildings, they do still add a lot more scope for personalization, thanks to a very generous set of customization hooks. These buildings certainly do fill out our housing plots. There is still a decent amount of space left for the exterior decoration, but at the same time it is starting to get a little bit cramped. So I do suspect that we will not be seeing any bigger houses at all in the future, unless the developers choose to start building upwards. And I do think that a few multi-story options would be really nice in future. Sadly, there is no sign of any new racial exterior appearances, something that is turning out to be one of the more requested features for player housing, but it does look that we will still be getting another couple of new options. These don't currently work on the PTR, but I am led to believe that there will be at least one treehouse option to come. And unlike the previous treehouse, these are options that you will be able to earn in-game. The other major update is blueprints, which will allow you to start to save room layouts or even your entire house for sharing or just to keep safe for reconstruction when you move rooms about. On top of this, MMO Champion has data mined some new pre-made room blueprints that will be purchasable from vendors. These are not currently testable on the PTR, but data mined indications are that they are template rooms, essentially empty rooms but with some cool additional details such as brand new window appearances or platforms in which to build upon. And this, for me, is a very interesting direction for the devs to take, but is one that I definitely like a lot. I'm personally most excited for those extra housing levels though. I hit max level on my house around about when patch 12.05 came out, and I know that many more hardcore housing fans hit that limit even faster than that. Doing endeavours in the hope that one day you might have something to spend all the extra housing XP that you're stacking up on has been an experience that is far more frustrating than it has been fun. I do like that we don't lose that stacked up housing XP, and in patch day I am expecting to get all 3 new levels unlocked right away, which is going to be very nice. But the start of a new season is when there's plenty of other things to do in the game. So in my view, this is a very suboptimal time to expand our housing space, and I would have much rather have had this increase in the 0.7 patch. And at the same time, once I do have those extra levels, it's going to be back to doing endeavours to stack up housing XP that I won't be able to spend, on the if and maybe that we end up getting more levels at some point in the future. Overall, I think that the pacing of these new levels leaves a lot to be desired. To be clear, being able to bank XP is a lot better than losing it outright, but that is a solution to a problem that in my opinion just shouldn't exist, which is the overly slow pacing of additional new levels. And if that slow pacing is due to technical constraints and how fast they can grow our housing layouts, extra budget didn't have to be the only thing that they could have rewarded from additional housing levels. For example, how about some more of those exterior customization elements? I would love bigger exterior windows for my house or more elaborate chimneys. And adding pets to the house could very easily have been a reward from a new housing level instead of just being dumped onto a vendor. Now, just before I move on from the subject of housing, there has also been an update for certain housing fans on the live game this week. If you were one of the unlucky few who were affected by a bug that meant that you were unable to unlock the daylight or nighttime circle rooms, this has now been fixed. So everyone should now have access to those rooms. That said, these rooms do still have some very annoying and bizarre placement restrictions. Restrictions that are not even consistent between the two styles of rooms. And I hope that the developers are continuing to work on these particular rooms to improve their usability in the future. And the last main PTR update this week is to our gearing up process. Ever since the launch of the new upgrade system back in Dragonflight, we've been enjoying 39 item level bumps from patch to patch. Something that meant that our myth track gear would end up matching the new season's adventurer track gear, giving us lots of options to farm new gear even in the pre-season lull process. But for the transition into Season 2 of Midnight, this is now going to be increased by 46 item levels. This is very likely a response to the increased item levels from Sporefall and the Ascendant Void Cores, and will take a fully maxed out 296 item down to matching a 6 out of 6 veteran piece in Season 2, with our current 6 out of 6 myth track item going down to 4 out of 6 veteran track instead. Now, the impact of this is that no matter how geared up you are right now, you can expect to get meaningful little item level bumps from almost anything you do in the game when the patch drops. And it does mean that we'll all have something to spend those veteran crests on, at least initially. In terms of power going into the new season, given the relative abundance of veteran track gear and crests, and likely some early champion track level drops in the pre-season week as well, I do think that most of us will be able to narrow that gap before the season starts proper, so I'm not expecting any major issues going into the season, and it will most probably feel very similar to the start of Season 1, tuning allowing, which in my book is a very good thing given how well that season turned out. Although, if you're not a fan of having to do other things than just raid a Mythic Plus, you might end up shedding a little baby tears as you have to dive into a few delves of World Crests in that first week. But just keep in mind, it is only going to be for a week. Moving over now to the retail game. And by the time this video is live, the Darkmoon Faire will be pretty much over and done with. However, there was one welcome update to the Darkmoon Faire that will be worth bearing in mind for when it comes around again next week. At the start of Midnight, the Darkmoon Faire reputation buff was removed from Midnight content. Not a major issue, but it did mean that there was much less reason to visit the fair than usual. Well, the good news is that this week the reputation was back, but with a very strange new restriction. It turns out that the buff now only applies to the extra reputation you get after maxing out the renowned tracks, or in other words, it only applies to those Paragon chest rewards. Now, this really isn't a big deal, but I'm nevertheless not a fan of this restriction. I know that reputation has seen some abuse at the start of many expansions, especially when there are reputation-based gear rewards, but the Darkmoon Faire has never really been an offender in that front. We've had 10% buffs from the Faire at the start of several expansions, and really the sky never fell in as a result. In my opinion, this restriction very much feels like a very unwelcome return of the Blizzard Fun Police that we were all too familiar with back in BFA, and I do hope that the developers take another hard look at this restriction. And next up, if you had the misfortune to visit Naigtal last week and ended up with this button stuck permanently in the middle of your screen, I do have a little quality of life tip for you, as you can get rid of it by dragging it onto an action bar. And if you don't have space in your action bars, you can very easily add an extra bar and set it to only show up in mouse over, and just hide it in an odd corner of the screen, which at least will get rid of the annoying thing. But again, this is a solution to a problem that really shouldn't exist. And my feedback to the developers is, come on guys, leaving people with a big icon stuck in the middle of the screen that they can't use is number one on the usability 101 don't do list. So let's have some urgency in getting this fixed. Announcements of a focus on quality of life improvements really do run hollow when issues like this are left for over a week without even an acknowledgement that it is a known issue. And lastly, it's reminder time. This Monday sees the one-day Luminous Luminaries micro holiday return for this year. This event is set in Faire, which I know is not many people's favourite zone, but the little event, which involves tracking down glowing fish to take back for analysis while dodging a giant one-shotting shark rare, is surprisingly fun, and it does reward a 5-day elapsed time underwater breathing and swim speed buff. Sadly, those buffs are removed if you enter any instance at all, even a PvE one, a very bizarre omission that I hope the developers fix this time around. Many of the similar event buffs simply have a restriction that makes them ineffective in instances, but does allow them to persist, and I do think that this buff should act the same way. That said, if you don't plan doing any instance content, I do think that this buff is well worth picking up, and the event only takes about 15 to 20 minutes to do. And that's it for this week's update. I would love to hear your thoughts on the PTR changes. Are you in the waiting room for 12.10? And if so, are you excited by what's on offer? Comment down below. If you found this video update helpful, entertaining, or even just plain annoying, then let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel to grow and help me to make more of these videos, along with other content, then hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. If you don't want to miss out whenever I release a new video, then as well as subscribing, you can follow me in social media for updates. My link's in the description below as well. I've also started streaming on Twitch on Wednesdays, Saturdays and Sundays, and you can find a link to my channel below, and I hope you'll be able to join me on my journey of exploration through midnight. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.